and welcome to the first episode of Mud, Blood and Bullets. I'm James.
I'm Paul.
You probably haven't ever heard of us, but I run a YouTube channel with a lot of military history and gaming. And Paul?
I write miniature war games based on World War I and other things.
And usually get very upset with me when I keep coming to you with all the history side of things.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, we do look at it slightly differently, don't we? I know you look at it much more as a gamer, and I tend to look at it as a bit more of a historian. But we usually don't come to blows, do we?
I don't think we've ever come to blows.
No. So what we thought for the first episode is we'd talk about different films and TV portraying the First World War, and actually our different perspectives on them. I'm kind of hoping that we have got different perspectives on some of them, because it might be a bit boring if we don't. Because the problem I always find with the First World War, I don't know if you find this, is sort of what's referred to as the Blackadder history.
Yeah, no, I do think that while it was great for comedy, it's not always the best at showing what life was really like. Mind you, there was quite a lot of comedy in that, and there was probably quite a lot of comedy in the trenches as well.
There was, I think. I mean, I think Baldrick was probably in that series the outstanding character, wasn't he? He was the British Tommy.
Yeah, no, definitely. Even if a bit too stupid, but you know, at the same time, you know, you've got that sort of level of industrialness and can-do attitude.
Yeah, I don't know if you know that one of the bases during the First Gulf War was actually called Baldrick Lines.
I did not know that, no.
I thought that sums up how the British Army adopted Baldrick. And Tony Robinson, in character, has actually done some British Army training videos for going on to training areas.
I love him. He's so cool.
Yes. In fact, they were all brilliant in that series. It was just the history, wasn't it, really, with that?
Yeah.
So I mean, I think our views on Blackadder are probably similar to 99% of people's. Absolutely amazing comedy.
Yeah. No, it is sometimes, you know, like, because it wasn't all trenches. That's the thing.
Yeah. I think some of the films we've chosen, I think, are really going to show that, which is something that's quite interesting. And I think as well, and I think it's my one regret with the Peter Jackson film, which we're not really looking at because we're looking at fictional films, was he says the war was different, or one of the participants says the war was different every year, but he never really then showed that within the film itself.
No, yeah, I know what you mean with that.
And I think the one thing I thought was good was the BBC did a series called Our World War, where they actually did do it year by year, and it did look very different each time. I don't know if you've come across that one.
I've not actually. No, I haven't seen that at all. I love the Lost Voices. I know that's I love that series.
That was amazing. But yeah, so I mean, Blackadder I think is probably pretty much spoken for. But to me, it sort of ties in very much into the Oh What a Lovely War film. You know, one of the classic World War I films. Which, I mean, what are your thoughts on that one?
Didn't that start off as a play by one of the soldiers, as a bit of a satire on the war?
A few of these do that, which I find quite interesting.
Yeah, I think that's how a lot of people got through it. Actually, I think mentally is kind of seeing it as a bit more sort of, you know, surreal and seeing the comedy in it.
Yeah. You see, I
think that's
because there is some comedy to it, isn't there? Now I think about that, I wouldn't necessarily have thought about the comedy aspect on it.
I think that's how. Yeah, no, that's kind of. Whenever I've sort of seen a review of What a Lovely War, it's always been, this is satire. This isn't, you know, true to life. It's, you know, it's made a bit more fun, a bit more enjoyable for the home public as such.
That's interesting. Again, that shows our very different views on it, doesn't it? Because of the way, the prism we're coming at it. That's a very interesting little film. I might have to rewatch that and have another look at that. So, yeah, I mean, it's an epic film. I just say I suffer a bit with it. It does have the satire, but it doesn't have the comedy with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, it is the big thing we keep saying, isn't it? The comedy of the Squaddy. They would find humor in everything.
Well, yeah, like there is I was listening to an audiobook that I got that basically says that, you know, the officers were, you know, one day just like looking out and sort of, you know, in between shell fire, all they would hear was the chanting and sort of, you know, you didn't hit us this time, and laughter of the men, which they found quite, you know, reassuring, actually, that they, you know, always had a smile on their face.
I think in every account I read of the First World War, the officers' opinion of the men is through the roof. I mean, the one that obviously jumps out for me is Tolkien. I'm a big fantasy fan, as you know, and Sam is the British Squaddy.
Yeah, he's definitely the one that's he's like the Batman, isn't he, for Frodo?
Yeah, and you know, he does see him through it. It is a fascinating thing that obviously Tolkien said he never intended to write it as sort of anything as allegory or anything like that. But if you read the scenes of the Dead Marches, that is straight out of World War One.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. Like, that's the thing with Tolkien's sort of portrayal, and even Peter Jackson's, you know, footage. I think they've really captured that quite nicely.
They have. Have you seen the film Tolkien, where they actually do?
I have, yeah. It's amazing. It's incredible, yeah.
Yeah. I think it missed stuff out, but I think the one of the scenes were phenomenal, and the scenes in the First World War and the inspiration on him, I think, were fantastic. We're doing well. We've actually didn't have this on our list of films to discuss.
We didn't, did we?
No, so I did consider it, and I thought, well, it's not really a World War One film, and then it just come up naturally, hasn't it?
No, the thing is, I think that was filmed in Ipswich, or some of it was filmed near Ipswich in some trenches. So,
right, that's interesting.
I don't know, 100%.
Well, let us know in the comments.
Please don't quote me on that. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll let you choose the next one. Which sort of film or TV would you like to bring up next?
So one of the things I hadn't heard about before you sort of put me onto it, actually, for the making of this, was the Anzacs TV show from Australia, and I found that incredible. Just like how sort of, I only watched one episode because, you know, I live a busy life, but and they are long episodes, but they're brilliant, and it shows
that exists, condensing it down, but it misses so much, and it misses.
I'm gonna watch the rest of them. They're brilliant. They have, the characters seem very likable. They're sort of, you know, always quite chipper, other than when, you know, like, oh, you know, you heard about him getting hit, you know, and, you know, then the mood goes down, but then he's okay. He's one of the lucky ones. So it's that whole sort of aspect of, you know, getting through it and sort of grinning and bearing it and sort of dealing with it, really. So and that was all at Gallipoli, I think, that I watched.
Well, it starts off through Gallipoli, and then moves to the Western Front, which it's very nice. What it shows to me as well was the changing face of the war, which I think is quite important. I think it does that very well, particularly the 100 Days offensive at the end of the war.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Which is, I haven't got to that part yet. Spoiler alert.
You know, I think you know enough World War One history to know there's going to be the 100 days at the end of it.
Yeah, unfortunately.
But yeah, it is something that I was stunned by when I watched it in the 80s, and when I found it on YouTube again, I was, oh wow, I was so over the moon about that.
Yeah, and I'm actually, I really enjoyed watching it when I was at work, and I was supposed to be doing work.
You do know this is going. This one, don't you? I ought to emphasise that.
Oh, it was fine. I was doing work at the same time.
It was your lunch break, wasn't it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you know, it was only an hour and a half.
Long lunch.
Yeah, long lunch. Yeah, lucky I watched myself.
Yeah, but yeah. What I do find with Anzacs though is it's very much the Australian myth of the First World War as well. Australia becoming a country, which very much it did.
Yeah. No, well, beforehand, I just don't think they were. You can see even in the first episode, it was like, oh, Queenslanders and Victorians. And so, yeah, no, I definitely agree that there is this building, and I think it was that building of a country and building of, the Anzac forces as a whole, which probably also went into sort of World War II a little bit as well. That sort of final action.
Yeah, there is a very much that Australia came out of the First World War as a country, and I think Canada did as well, and South Africa. The three of them very much stopped being dominions and became countries.
Yeah, I think that would have been the case for the Caribbean countries as well. However, we didn't really utilize them in the same way as we did the sort of more European descended, countries. And I think India as well was one of those ones that did kind of start forming that national base. It had already got sort of a want to be a nation. But I know eventually it sort of, really triggered it. That World War One was, they were promised their freedom almost.
Yeah.
And some of it happened, but not enough for their liking. So.
Yeah, and World War II definitely solidifies that the more you read on that. So yeah. I mean, it's very much an Australian formation myth, I think, and I think that it's not the only one. Gallipoli is another one, the classic Mel Gibson film. So it's unusual to actually say Mel Gibson and good historical film in the same sentence, isn't it? Really.
It is, yeah. Yeah, usually, like, if you look at Braveheart, it's, oh, okay, yeah, I don't think that's technically correct, but okay.
Yeah, it reminded of a review of Pearl Harbor, which said, there are some historical things that are right in this. The Americans had a base at Pearl Harbor and it was attacked.
On that day.
Yeah, but I mean, Gallipoli, I mean, I find it's quite an interesting film. Gallipoli is always fascinating to me because it's always seen as Australians and New Zealanders doing, sort of being abused, huge losses. Some people will pick up on the British, particularly, is it the Northumberland Fusiliers with 5 VCs before breakfast?
Yeah, so yeah, they did pretty well actually in that day.
Yeah, and they take
full way of saying it.
But what I always find fascinating is no one ever mentions the fact there's a big French involvement, and I believe
and Indian as well.
And India. I have to be honest, Indian I tend to regard as part of the British Army, which it's a separate army, but it's within the chain of command and so on. But yeah, and it does come back, as we say, very much. This is now the formation of the national myths, isn't it? But I do find that Gallipoli has got a mythology all of its own, where the history doesn't really follow.
No, I agree. Yeah, no, because especially with the French being there and the other British battalions, I think when I first really started learning about Gallipoli, when I was in school, kind of thing, it was always sort of considered the Anzacs were doing it. And I think you were actually the one that enlightened me in a couple of years ago to actually being, oh no, the French and Brits were there as well. I'm like, oh, okay. And then I started looking into it deeper and deeper, and I was like, oh my god.
Yeah, it's a massive multinational operation, and I suppose this is what I love. Our conversation, something will suddenly click, and it just struck me that it's, while people always compare it to D-Day, that multinational aspect is there as well.
Yeah,
it's an interesting little thought.
Yeah. Plus, you think that it was completely unnecessary, unlike D-Day. Realistically,
there's a subject for a whole podcast in itself. I think it was one of the things it was worth trying.
I think there was better places to go. So Winston Churchill was one of those people that actually wanted to go to North Germany and invade there instead. but was overruled, and that was why he actually eventually got kicked out of the War Council, and then found himself, or the War Cabinet, I should say, before it became the War Council, and then thus became, it then became, a lieutenant colonel in the 6th Battalion Royal Scots Fusiliers.
Yeah. Yeah, I always find that fascinating, and he makes a lovely cameo appearance in one of the ones I've got on my list to talk about later on. But I actually think there is a phenomenal film that's never been made. Almost a Young Winston Part 2, looking at his life in the trenches.
He was only there for 6 months, let's be honest, but he did go on raids quite a lot, so that would be quite interesting.
Well, he was out in most nights, wasn't he? He actually goes out to no man's land with the troops. I find that fascinating. But we're sort of wandering away from Gallipoli a bit here, aren't we?
I could do that.
Yeah, we're good at that. I do find Gallipoli is very much, though, an anti-British film. I don't know if you see that in it.
I haven't really. Yeah, it possibly. I think maybe Mel Gibson just hates the English. Maybe that's what it is.
People say he hates everybody, but
I think he hates the English a lot, because that's now Braveheart and Gallipoli. That's 2 movies. Boom. Once again, this is not. This is only conjecture. It's not. Actual an accusation.
What you're saying is, please don't sue me for libel.
Yeah. He might like the British. I don't know. I'm just speculating.
And, you missed the one set in North America, The Patriot.
Oh yeah, that's another one where that's free. Yeah. Okay, so evidence is kind of building, but I will still say it is only allegedly.
Yeah.
Please don't sue.
Yeah, although in all fairness, having a character based on Tarleton as the villain, you could get away with the British as the villains on that. Yeah. But we are sort of wandering off topic. Yeah, there's a scene in Gallipoli that always strikes me, is that they talk about the British landing, and they're just sat in the bay not doing anything.
That's
drink tea, which seems to be a common complaint in films.
The thing is so when I've been so I'm usually the guy that looks at it from a game point of view, but there was one thing I did hear about Gallipoli as a whole, sort of the actual peninsula, and that was at one point they were under heavy machine gun fire. The Australians just sat down, started eating, and apparently they became so numb to the machine gun fire around them, they're just like, it's lunchtime, and just start chowing down. So that's a nice little interesting fact. It's so numb to it.
I can believe that. I always love the scene in A Bridge Too Far, where Sean Connery's offered a cup of tea and explains everything's going wrong. Do you really think a cup of tea is going to help? And the corporal goes, "It's not going to hurt, sir."
It won't hurt.
So I think stopping and eating and stopping and drinking are actually quite sensible things to do sometimes.
Yeah, it's why we started putting kettles in our tanks as well, let's be honest.
Yeah.
Because if you get hit by, a shell that goes inside and goes bang, there's not much time to eat after that. So you might as well enjoy yourself where you can.
Yeah, and I was watching. I'd not seen it before. I'd watched the To Hell and Back, the Eddie Murphy autobiography film, which is kind of weird when he plays himself. And one of them is absolutely obsessed with carrying a coffee pot with him. So it's not just the Brits.
Okay, nice.
We're good at finding random stuff, me and you. There is another Australian film that jumps to mind as well, which is The Light Horseman.
I haven't seen that. No.
Now that's a very interesting one, because it's about the Battle of Beersheba. And the Australians do get associated a lot with the Mesopotamian campaign. And it is strange in that they actually, they're not cavalry, they are light infantry, but they are mounted as basically dragoons, use of earlier terminology. And they actually do a cavalry charge wielding the bayonets rather than swords.
That's awesome.
And it's a very well shot film. And it does. It's, if I say it's Gallipoli, but with slightly less anti-British feeling, I think.
Oh, that's good. I like an anti, no anti-British feeling in that. Or less.
Yeah, but for a spectacular cavalry charge, you can't beat it. It is phenomenal.
It is quite hard to do those in film, to be honest.
Yeah, and it's done over the right sort of distance as well. It's not like a little charge. This is it's quite a distance. I think it's about a mile, and it actually shows it over that sort of distance, which is nice.
That's incredible. Yeah, no, I'll have to. That's on my list now.
Yeah, they reuse a lot of the footage in what I think is actually another good TV series, which is Young Indiana Jones.
See, once again, this is when we were talking earlier. This is the first I've ever heard of it, so I'm not much of an Indiana Jones fan, in fairness. But
heretic. But no,
well, the last one I watched, it was the most recent one where he's old and decrepit, and then they were like, "Oh yeah, this Nazi seems to have got younger somehow." So like slightly older, but they're still like what? I just didn't. I sort of zoned out.
Yeah, I've got to guess, I quite liked the last one, but then I knew something about the artifact, having played a Call of Cthulhu adventure where it turns up.
Oh.
Which sums it up. But yeah,
cheating.
Yeah, I know. The Young Indiana Jones, though, I find very impressive because it's written by people who know the history and love the history.
Well, that helps. I think that if they're passionate about it, it carries on into their work, doesn't it?
Well, it was actually originally designed as a way to teach school kids, which I find fascinating. Because let's be honest, while Indiana Jones is really popular, if you've got kids watching that and you show them a history program about it with Indiana Jones in it, they're going to watch it.
They're going to listen more as well, aren't they? Get that retention.
Yeah. I mean, we said about Blackadder being like that. And unfortunately, that is now the generation that we are part of. That is how the First World War is seen. I think that's got a lot to do with it.
A lot of the time, yeah. Well, I think that was kind of my first real taste of World War One.
Yeah, I think most people's. But what I like with Young Indiana Jones as well is he joins the Belgian army, which is something that next to nobody knows much about.
That's because they lost their country.
Not all of it. They do hold part of it.
That's true. I know. I've been facetious.
I know. But what I find fascinating is the Belgians didn't go in for the mass attacks that everybody else did. It's right. We're sitting here until we know how we can do it.
Now the Belgian forces were pretty interesting in themselves anyway. So I think we followed the French example of mass, forward movement, and
I think we do initially. I think it's, and I think that's.
We also did the bad stuff with the shrapnel.
Yeah. But
try and cut razor wire.
They thought it would work, unfortunately.
But the French had already worked out it didn't.
Yeah, it's classic not talking to each other again, isn't it?
Yeah. But we're better now.
Yeah. What I like with the Young Indiana Jones as well, it doesn't pull punches because he turns up at Verdun of all places.
Wow. And I would not want to turn up there.
Shall we say he has an unhappy experience there? And for a program that was aimed at really at kids, it was quite dark, some of it, but it also had lovely little touches for the adults. There's a little scene where he ends up playing, I think if I'm correctly, it's cricket in a village street against a couple of English officers, and they invite him for a drink afterwards, and they introduce themselves as Graves and Sassoon. And unless you know anything about the history, that is just straight over people's heads.
And that's really interesting. I have to put that down on my list as well. Making me watch a lot of TV.
Yeah, I think we definitely watch too much sometimes. But yeah, I did think, like I said, it suffered because it was so expensive to do, and the end result was they never actually finished filming them, which is very sad. But what is out there is actually very good.
It doesn't. I think that's the thing, isn't it? Sometimes, like especially when you then sit and you've got something like The Trench. I don't know if you've seen The Trench, with Daniel Craig, and I think there's Danny Dyer in there, and there's some other big names. I can't remember all of them.
No.
But I found that terrible. Well, one, Daniel Craig can't have an accent. 1 second he's Scottish, the next is from East London.
Yeah. To me, I think the big problem with it was probably because where it was focused. It's the going over the top on the first day of the Somme, which, let's be brutally honest, most people's view of the First World War is the first 12 hours of the Battle of the Somme.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's all the mud and everything, and then we're going, yeah, but there wasn't any mud. They're actually going across grassland.
Well, that was on there was a BBC one, wasn't there? There was one, I think, The Somme or something. That was a TV show. I know that was, once again, not it was real. It's meant to be more real life, but that showed actually how much graft there was. Especially as a lot of the films were fallow. You've got to think about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, I think in the public eye, it's got mixed up with Third Battle of Passchendaele,
which was a horrible, muddy mess.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. The two have sort of become conflated in the public eye.
Well, it doesn't help that then media such as The Trench are sort of coming out and sort of fixating on that sort of stereotype.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, that was how I did see the First World War for many years.
Me too.
Yeah, John Harris's absolutely brilliant book, Covenant with Death, of the build up to the Battle of the Somme, and then the first 12 hours. Fantastic novel, but it's just that snapshot of that one little bit of the war.
Yeah, no, the war itself is incredible. Like even the mud. There was always a lot of mud, especially in the trenches. But then again, they were dug out of the earth, and the rain. We were always the Brits were always on the lower side a lot of the time anyway. Pretty much 90% of the time we were down the hill, where the Germans were up the hill.
So that's why we end up on the offensive all the time, is to take those heights. Yeah, it's because I think without going there and seeing, you don't really get that.
No, 100%, and or even just so I've been reading. So I fell in love with the Cambridgeshires and Suffolks because I live in Suffolk, and so I started volunteering at the Cambridgeshire and Suffolk Regiment Museum. Lovely place. It's free to go. There's also a little place at Moores Hall, but that's charged, so don't worry about that. Advertising. And
I never know. I might have to come down and do a bit of a shoot down there.
Yeah, it's a small museum. It's free to come into, and but there's loads of little things and bits and bobs to do. And the creator Claire she's fantastic. She knows her stuff. So yeah, no, but it's definitely you fall in love, and then learning about the Schwaben. I'm terrible at pronunciation. I don't even pronounce English words correctly. The Redoubt.
Yes.
Basically, Colonel at the time, I think it was Colonel Riddle, actually had made the whole plan. It'd already been attacked a couple of times, and sort of said, actually, if we dig a trench just in front of the redoubt, once we captured it. So that's what they did. They were bombing the redoubt instead of the German artillery. They were bombing the redoubt instead of the trench that was like 100 meters in front. So the men were relatively safe.
Yeah.
And it's little things like that you go, ooh, but that was still relatively well covered grassland wise.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And that had been bombed for weeks.
Yeah, I think off the top of my head, the one film that did get that right, and it's a film I don't particularly think a lot of other than that, was 1917.
Yes. No, 1970. I love that movie. I fell in love with that.
Got a disagreement.
So I personally think that, like, don't get me wrong, it's very much a dramatization of a story told, and sort of, bits and bobs have been picked out of it and to make it more interesting. However, I love it because it sort of shows a different side, because also they've got the village scene.
Yes.
And to me,
That's
that
impressive.
shows it's not just trenches, mud and trenches. It's not just that. There is villages. There is, it's like my great grandfather. He died with the Lancashire Fusiliers, and he died next to a cemetery in a field. So, which was actually on top of the cemetery. It's like so look on Google Maps, because I've not managed to get there myself. The hill, the field is actually a little bit higher than the cemetery. So, but the cemetery is all covered in forest as well. So it's a very strange situation.
Yeah. There are certain bits in the film I think are fantastic. I'll be honest. The one touch I did like, it's almost jumping back to what we said earlier, and it's so understated, is the Indian soldier in the back of the truck.
Yeah.
I think most of them had left the Western Front by that point, but
I know, right? Yeah.
it was nice
The
to see
horses were
that
still there.
thought.
Well, they still had the cavalry. The cavalry
They-
was still hanging about, but yeah, no, they wouldn't have. The infantry had all sort of pretty much gone by that point.
Yeah, but it was nice to see that there was that sort of recognition.
Yeah.
And the photography I think is fantastic. But it didn't gel for me, if that makes sense.
I get that. I get that. Yeah.
And I don't know if that's just the difference in sort of where we come at these films from.
Yeah, I'm coming at it from it's pretty colours. Don't worry about the history. The history's too depressing.
Well, it can be, but I also think there is the comedy, and I've got a good example of that one we'll pick up in a minute. But it's interesting that we both see that one in very different ways.
Yeah. No, yeah. Usually we agree with them a little bit because
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it does seem to be a bit of or around that time there was a bit of an influx, weren't there, of World War One films? Probably for the 100th anniversary and just after, when it was more in the public consciousness.
I think so. Yeah, there is actually a movie that I don't think is on the list. I have watched, mainly because I have a love for the Indian army and Gurkhas as a whole.
Yeah,
And that's 1915, a Gurkha story. Now, this is once again, it's based on, I think, a story you told me about, where a Gurkha dragged a British soldier back to our lines after the British soldier had been injured. So it's based on that. However, it does change a lot of things because there is also this, like, he's having a crisis. He's separated from his own sort of troops, and they're sort of fighting and stuff like that. But he's sort of internally fighting as well. He's having a bit of a crisis. So yeah, it's not that jolly happiness, but yeah, no.
no, that's not me. That one, that must be
Yeah,
somebody
no,
else.
someone else must. Oh, is that, or I just start googling stuff. But no, and I sort of, because I really enjoy Gurkhas anyway. And,
I think we may have discussed it because I
they've been impressive.
Chilcon about, not Chilcon, what would it be? What would it be Chilcon?
BritCon. I think it was BritCon.
And we were having a good talk about the sort of our respect for the Gurkhas.
Yeah, no, the Indians and the Gurkhas did impressive work. So
yeah, and it's always amazing how many people did contribute. When I was at the National Memorial Arboretum at the Shot at Dawn Memorial, I don't know if you've ever seen that.
I've not known.
They identified a Chinese labourer who'd been shot at dawn, and I'd never come across that. So it's amazing how many nations contributed, and it really does come across as a world war when you start looking at it.
I was going to say, I went to Belgium in the summer, and there was a cemetery just behind a chocolate factory we were going to. I went, well, I'll go in there to pay my respect, and it's a war cemetery, so see what's there. And there was actually a Egyptian labourer had been buried there as well.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Which, yeah, no, it was incredible. So you sit there and they've placed it slightly differently because of respect for the I assume it's respect for the faith that they believed in. So yeah, no, it was interesting because there was also Russians from World War One. There were all kinds of things. People there. So it was quite interesting.
Oh, that sounds fascinating. There's a memorial, I think, to the Indian troops in Brighton, I believe.
Probably. Yeah, well, isn't the pavilion? Yeah, the pavilion, I think, originally was a hospital, if I remember correctly.
Bizarrely, I came across it in a review of Memoir 44, the board game.
Really?
Yeah.
Isn't that I Shut Up, Sit Down, or was that the one?
Yeah. He actually does a very good review at the end of it, or talk about the sort of the Indian troops serving there, which I thought was fascinating. Because I keep meaning to do a video about the Indian squadron in the Long Range Desert Group.
No, they've done some impressive stuff. Even Mahatma Gandhi in the Boer War was, he set up the medical sort of thing to sort of, show the British actually how useful the Indians were, and that worked eventually.
Yeah, what he referred to as the non-martial races of the Indians, because that's what as the British were very much this ethnic group are good soldiers, these aren't. He wanted to show they all were.
Yeah. Yeah, and he did do that in the Boer War. By the end of the second one, I think it proved his point.
Yeah, and he actually, and there is, and I'm going to have to dig out some wargaming figures for this. He even there's a Zulu revolt, and he actually re-establishes the medical unit for it.
He does, yes, yeah.
Is it something like that? And I've got some Zulu figures. I'm dying to combine them into that. That could be can you imagine telling the players you're going to be playing Gandhi, and then putting that.
I think it's definitely it's quite important really to sort of remember that like Gandhi was not always just anti-British, because he wasn't anti-British really. He just wanted freedom. He was a nationalist,
pro-Indian rather than anti-British.
Yeah, which is positive. I know we're a bit off subject, but yeah.
Oh, we are good at that. I don't know how your other half puts up with us two talking when we meet up at a show.
I know, right? It's very tolerant.
She sort of sits there and going, I'll run the stall for the next half hour then.
Yeah, at least. Half hour's the minimum.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we went a bit off topic there, but it is interesting when we start doing that. Like I said, I think, well, we're sort of talking a bit about sort of the sideshows there. Let's talk about the classic sideshow film, Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a classic movie in itself, really, isn't it? I personally don't like it.
I think it tries so hard to be a good film. And let's forget the history for a second. Phenomenal as cinematography, the score, the acting.
Yeah, I
won't with the history sometimes, but they're not. To me, they're not big ones.
I think. Don't get me wrong. He did do impressive work, but I do think he's a bit overrated.
Yes.
Especially I think I think that's the problem. I think he's a bit overrated as a person. He did do incredible work, but I think more should be sort of looked at the sort of Arab revolt as a whole. There was some other bigger players in that, and I think we maybe just latch onto him because he's English, and
I think what does it is the fact that he refuses his medals at the end of the war. And that was unheard of. Now he's in the public eye. He's brought attention to it. That's where his fame comes from.
Yeah, that is probably what it is, and also I do think that Western history does have a bit of a habit of ignoring stuff that's a bit far away, and maybe the wrong color, as such. I do think we have a history of kind of ignoring it a bit because it's not near us, so it's not important. So I think that's the problem, and I can say that as I'm middle class white man.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, if I'm honest, is the fact that the trenches, it's the majority of the troops, let's be honest. But it's also the fact you can even hear the gunfire in the south east of England.
Yeah.
So it comes home. I mean, when was the last time you came across a reference to British troops fighting in Salonika, or even Italy? Come to that.
Well, I know lots of them because I really love the Salonika campaign, but
possibly the wrong audience to ask for that. But what I mean, the only reference I can
beforehand, I had no idea. Like before, sort of 2023, I didn't know about Salonika at all. It was my information was null and void.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of thinking like a couple of pictures in Ospreys and a Sabaton song.
Yep, that's pretty much it. And I think there was, but it was the problem is once again the British didn't want to be there. As soon as Serbia was kind of conquered by the Bulgarians and the Austrians, they're not really interested anymore. The problem is the Italians eventually got that way as well. But the French and the Serbians were quite keen to, keep fighting. But the French were also sort of convinced to sort of stay, being that they were the sort of main ally there. But yeah, Britain the whole time wanted to leave, from what I've heard. So
yeah, I do wonder how much of it is modern history impacting. Because let's be honest, gallant little Serbia is a term I didn't hear after about 1991.
Yeah, possibly. But I think it was always a bit forgotten, a bit kind of go away, because Britain didn't really care about it. It was, they think under-resourced. The Western Front could be under-resourced. Well, Salonika was, if that was under-resourced, then I don't know what Salonika was. How they got anything, I don't know. Make do and mend.
Yeah, you can see the way that one's going to go. I mean, if we do move outside of sort of the Western Front, there was a BBC drama. I don't know if you've come across this one, called All the King's Men, starring David Jason.
I think I've heard of it. I don't think I've watched it.
It's so obscure. I know somebody, when they were doing a review of it, they have managed to find one picture of it. So BBC, please release it on DVD if.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It tells the story of the Sandringham Company, which was made up of troops all from the Sandringham estate.
I think I've heard it. That's the reason I've heard about it. Not because of anything else, but yeah.
Yeah, but there became sort of a legend that they marched into the mist, and when the mist cleared, they'd all vanished, and so it's almost like the sort of the archers on the Western Front in 1914. You get that mythology cropping up.
That's probably just because a lot of the men were probably exhausted after doing 150 miles marches, and like no food, and probably were just like, oh my god, because these were all like regular soldiers at this point in 1914, and then you're probably thinking, yeah, these guys have just done a lot of marching over a good few hours of sleep.
I did some digging on that for a video I never got round to, and nobody mentions it until the story's published by Arthur Machen, and then all of a sudden everybody's seen them.
So I know that I did hear about one. Well, it was from a doctor's point of view, saying, well, there has been psychological damage to the men because of the marching, and because it's just not healthy to have kept them awake and marching with no food pretty much. But that was the only way really to survive, because if you look at the Suffolks, I think the 2nd Battalion that were there at the time, they really struggled to sort of, they were told you're not allowed to retreat, and that was what they were told from, I think it was Le Cateau. I probably butchered that as well. Sorry, France.
Sounds about like that one.
And they were told you can't. So they fought pretty much the last man. But then you also have other times, because I was reading the official history of the Suffolks, because I had fallen in love with them. They were hard not to be honest. Along with the Cambridges, they're really hard not to fall in love with. They were saying that actually the 2nd Battalion, I think it was A Company, were in the trenches one day, and they were just minding their own business, and they saw some men in khaki digging a trench. Just there was only like half a dozen sort of troops over there digging a trench, and there must be sappers. Is what the official history sort of says. And then it's shown that someone has gone, I think they're sappers. They're not wearing the right uniform, for sappers. So they've gone to confront them, and when they have, it's Germans digging a trench, basically like 100 meters away from their trench. Um, it's like, oh, hello, and they get shot at, and they shoot back, and they take some prisoners. And yeah, it's that's quite strange. So it all sort of happens around that 1914 time.
Yeah.
The war is still kind of fluid. It's not, you can't go, oh, the Germans only ever wore German uniform. Like the guys in the back of my picture here, you can see some of them with the pickle helm and and other bits and bobs. There's also a French guy just over in the corner as well, but I don't know what he's doing there.
There's a story behind that, isn't there?
Yeah.
But even when we say German uniform, I've got it's German hussars, I think it is. I've got a photo of them getting out of a boat on a reconnaissance, and you're sitting there going, "Oh," because it's a black and white photo. You can't tell the colour of the uniform, but they've got all the frogging across the front. They're not wearing the pickelhaubes. They've got like a hussar busby.
Oh wow!
And it's like, and you're getting out of a boat. It is not the image you expect to see.
Yeah. The other thing is, I was looking through some pictures, once again of the Suffolks. Going to keep referencing them, and one of them had a 1903 bandolier, which should, they would never have had them in World War One. But this guy is literally just standing there with his bandolier on, just like, "Hey, you got my bandolier on." He's happy as Larry. So so it seems quite strange that how he got that, I don't know. He must have raided the old storeroom at the depot. But
well, I mean, I remember my old 58 webbing when I was going out on exercise with the cadets, and it looked fairly normal. Although I changed the buckles around for click buckles rather than the fancy ones, which took forever to do up. But after you got past the ammunition pouches, every other pouch was different to what I was issued. So it had like a Pakistani ammunition pouch on the rear because it would hold the large mess tin, whereas none of the other pouches would. It had an American Alice pouch for holding a compass. So people would look at it and go, "What on earth is that?" And squaddies are awful for it. This great line in a book, I'm desperately trying to remember, The Long Reach. It's a novel about British paras and Marines fighting off Guatemalan invasion of Belize. And one of the officers is looking at his men who've just come off exercise with the US Airborne, and he's going, "They've got that much US kit, I'm just hoping they haven't swapped the rifles." I think a lot of the time for gamers, you read the official, this is what you're issued, and expect that on the figure. Although I'll give you marks out of 10, your Winston Churchill figure with the Adrian helmet.
Yeah.
Which is historically correct.
Yeah, no, well, we in Venice, it's very like the Paul Hicks sculpture as well, which is also with the Adrian helmet. But yeah, no, we did try to make it slightly different, just so that people didn't just go, "Oh, I can still get the Paul Hicks one."
Yeah. But you've given me a lovely lead into the next one, because you've talked about the fact that you can't pronounce foreign names well, which is
can't pronounce English words well.
Well, it's a tradition in the British Army, because Ypres was called Wipers by the troops for almost the entire war. And Winston Churchill turns up in a BBC drama called The Wipers Times.
Which is that was their newspaper, wasn't it?
It was, which I'm fascinated by, and I've actually got the republished versions of them.
That's still those.
Well, it's fascinating for me because I was badged to the Worcestershire and Sherwood Foresters Regiment.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Oh, just wait till I see you face to face now. But this was actually done by the Sherwood Foresters. So nice. For me, it was to see the predecessor of my cap badge was fascinating. And the Wipers Times was the trench newspaper, and as we keep saying about the humour that was so obvious in that Wipers times. Although it gets called different names as they moved around, which
But I know that the Great War Huts near Bury St Edmunds, another great place to go, which has World War One huts, former sort of temporary housing that they used for barracks and stuff. They actually had a chat on the Wipers Times actually helped by a printing area as well, somewhere near Bury St Edmunds or Norwich or something. So yeah, no, that's another really great place. And they've actually got trenches and it leads from World War 1914, so right at the beginning, sort of how that sort of developed through to 1915 with the bricks from sort of broken houses. That then they realised bricks don't go well in trenches, or not with bombs anyway. And so then they've got their sort of duck boards and so yeah, so it's that sort of progression. You can go round and see the progression of 1914 to 1918. Which is quite cool.
Yeah, and I think that's often something that's forgotten, is that change. And I know we've talked about this previously. My big bugbear that when you look at trenches, they're always badly done because they have two parapets, and you should actually have a parados at the back raised higher to actually stop you being skylined.
Well, sometimes it was just breastworks, wasn't it? It was just sandbags built up. To sort of defend the men because they just couldn't dig any down any deeper because it was just going to go into the water table. So
but the evolution of trenches, particularly on the German side, is fascinating.
Oh no, some of they had full mod cons pretty much for the time. Oh man, yeah, I think I'd rather be in a German, to be honest, but
there is that. But yeah, the Wipers Times, I thought, was very good black comedy, and it was, to me, it was Blackadder but historically accurate.
And I think it's also probably based on the newspaper anyway, and so they probably had that sort of field article, didn't they? So I think that probably helped a little bit. And I think because especially let's be honest, the humour you need in that kind of environment is probably very similar to sort of police work and ambulance work and stuff like that nowadays. When you're seeing that kind of carnage all the time, it's probably easier to take a bit of a dark view to it.
I think you're right, and it was interesting. The treatment of psychological casualties is a lot more advanced in World War One than we think. We sort of everyone thinks it's shell shock, and perhaps they might remember being shipped off to Craiglochan Castle. I've probably got that one wrong. It's the one where Sustain ends up, and there was the drama about it, wasn't there? Remembrance. Yeah, I've not seen that, which is surprising for me. I'm surprised I haven't actually gone to look into that yet. That's what bit for me to go off and look at anyway. But yeah, there was that very black humour, and my favourite scene in the Wipers Times was pure Blackadder, where he's getting told that he's spending too much time on the newspaper. He should stop doing it, and the officer walking out says to him, "So I want you to be more offensive. Have you got that?" And they're just grinning at him. "Yes, sir." And then you get the next edition of the paper comes out. Lovely scene.
I must admit, I've been reading the Suffolk Gazettes from 1914, 1915 and stuff, and yeah, I think they even get a little bit darker as time goes on, and that's more of the official sort of Suffolk Regiment news kind of thing. So they do stop actually in September of 1914 until 1915, when they've realised it's not going to be over by Christmas.
Yeah, isn't there so much we can look at into all this? The problem I find with World War One is it's a rabbit hole war. As soon as you start looking into something, you're off on tangents.
Yeah, and also, there's especially when you then start like delving into. So I started looking into my grandfather, and just then delving into sort of like they don't have his body. He's not sort of marked down in any graveyard, so he's just on Tierval. And so I'm like, okay, I've got to try and sort of, work out. And then actually everyone pretty much on that platoon, probably platoon anyway, or section, there was a sergeant, a lance corporal, my grandfather, and then a number of privates. So probably a little section, all sort of, went the way of the dodo that day. So yeah, it's quite interesting, really.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And that was the sheer tragedy of the PALS battalions, wasn't it? It was they all knew each other.
Yeah.
Because this is what's I think often overlooked, is the fact that casualties fall disproportionately on one unit compared to another. So one unit will get through virtually unscathed. The next one, perhaps a whole platoon's wiped out.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. And then, a whole street basically is gone. But another street is not touched.
Yeah. I mean, you had villages, didn't you, that were called the Blessed Villages when they had no casualties in the First World War. And there were even some doubly blessed ones that had casualties in neither war.
Yeah, which is pretty impressive, and then there's a number of villages around me that, they've got their own, like, it's just a tiny village, and it's got sort of monuments to, to the sort of, their fallen in World War I and II.
Yeah. Well, I used to, in the cadet force, we used to use an old schoolhouse, and it's tucked away in the middle of the Peak District, and it's like you've got the schoolhouse and you've got no other building in sight, because it was the one for the estate, and this one estate has got a war memorial.
Wow.
And there are quite a few names on it.
Yeah, which is scary, isn't it? When you then sit and go, "Ooh,"
Yeah. But when you start thinking of that, and I think that's a fascinating topic in itself that we'll probably have to do one about, is the remembrance of the First World War.
Yeah, no, in Bury St Edmunds, so where I live, we've got one on the Boer War as well, for the volunteer battalions, as well as we've got World War I and II. That's on just one. So yeah, so there's sort of two different memorials for sort of a number of different wars. So that's pretty good.
Yeah.
If good is the right word.
Well, I found a lovely thing out a few years ago, which is there was a new town built, and they've actually built a war memorial with no names on it.
Ooh, didn't know that.
I can't decide if it's good or bad. It's nice that they've thought of it, but the fact that they are thinking of it is
a bit concerning. Yeah.
Interesting little digression again there.
Yeah, interesting. Never really thought about what would happen if a new town was made, and
yeah, it isn't something that's obvious, is it?
No, I don't know if I'd have built a war memorial.
I'd be interested to see what they did in Milton Keynes, actually. That might be a little rabbit hole to go down later.
Yeah, might have to go to Milton Keynes.
Yeah. Well worth a trip, because you can go to Bletchley.
That's true. And also you can drive around lots of roundabouts. So
yeah,
I've already done that.
I've done that way. So yeah, it's not the one's best for that. So actually, we're sort of talking a bit about sort of psychological and things like that. There was a film that you mentioned that I'd not heard of, Death Watch.
Yes, so it's a psychological thriller. Based, there's a lot of mud, and it's a bit sort of, because it's a horror still. So if you think about it, there's like living barbed wire and mud men and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And there's been some brilliant games come out that sort of do this really well. Not just in the RPG scene, actually, even in the war game scene as well. So it's quite interesting what people have done with it. And but what I really like is it's just a little part of a section. It's got an officer, a sergeant, and that's really it. Just a number of privates. Then they find themselves walking through the mist, falling into a German trench that's been abandoned. Apparently, it's not truly historical, so you should take everything with a pinch of salt. But
you're
basically,
trying to cover my objections before I get to them, aren't you?
Oh yeah, something like that. I personally love it because it has this whole psychological thriller with it. It's that horror, but they've got like rats eating the limbs of an injured soldier who's like, "Oh, my legs are moving," and then the doctor takes off the blanket and is actually just rats gnawing at his decapitated legs, basically. So and then there's a private or corporal goes insane and starts, beating to death a officer, which is played by Lawrence Fox. So, maybe not a bad thing. But though saying that, many troops did actually, I think more in the Americans, is what I've heard about, but a lot of troops, if their officer was mistreating them, would be known to throw a little grenade into their bedroom
Yeah,
the chimney.
it occurs a lot in Vietnam.
It does,
But
yeah, but there is stories in World War One and Two as well.
Well, I found a reference back in the 1700s.
Oh, wow.
Officer who'd been mistreating his troops. I did a quick video on it. There's a short buried somewhere on my channel. He stands in front of his men before a battle and says, "Look, at least do me the favor of letting the enemy shoot me." And they get into the end of the battle. The battle's won. He stands in front of his troops, raises his hat and goes, "Hurrah, we have won the battle," and is shot at that moment. And the person who's telling the story comments, "It was not entirely sure that the enemy had shot him."
I was going to say, yeah. Well, this is the thing, especially in the British Army. There's stories that actually it's the officers had to treat their men well, because otherwise the Tommy could complain to their through their chain of command, and actually they could be moved on. So it's one of those things that I think if you didn't treat them well, you're going to get a bit of a reputation, because even what chap is it? I think even Cornwallis had problems with that, and that's in the Revolutionary Wars.
Yeah. Yeah, it is fascinating. There is that massive mutual respect, isn't there, that the British Army have between the officers and the men. And I think part of that is the fact that the officers, while they were generally more middle and upper class, they took a great pride in the fact that officer casualties were nearly twice the rate of a private soldier. I saw the figures earlier today, actually. It was 11.5% of soldiers were killed, 20% of officers.
Yeah, no, officers did have it worse.
Yeah.
Even the public school boys as well. So this is in the Royal Fusiliers, who are behind me. They actually had public school battalions, and a lot of them then went on to become officers. However, if you see a little PS in front of their service number, that means they're a public school boy. And even if they're in like a different battalion, they may have been put there just to sort of fill in numbers at some point, or transferred from those other battalions.
Well, there are over 1,000 old Etonians are killed in the First World War.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it?
It is fascinating. But like I said, there is that lovely mutual respect, I think, in the British Army, which which gives me a lovely link into the next one, which doesn't appear, I think, so much in the French Army, and possibly one of the classic war films, Paths of Glory, Kubrick film.
I don't think I've seen that one, but I have seen a different one based on the French Army.
Yeah, it's Kirk Douglas playing a French colonel who's given a suicidal attack.
That's a shame that it's not a Frenchman, but okay.
Well, he pulls it off very well.
Oh, does he? That's a shame.
It's a very good film, and what happens is they're given a suicidal attack, and it's one of the classic tracking shots where the camera follows them across no man's land. They're getting mown down. The mud is there. It's the stereotypical World War I, in all fairness. But the troops can't get to the German trenches. He goes back to try and get support. It's failing dismally. And the general actually orders his artillery to fire on his own troops to spur them on.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds about right for the French.
Yeah. What then happens is the attack fails, and the general blames the colonel and his troops, and he wants them court-martialed. and eventually the compromise is reached. 3 people will be selected, one from each of the subunits, and they'll be tried for cowardice. And it's a courtroom scene. And it doesn't have the ending you expect. I'll leave it at that. I won't give you a spoiler on that.
I'll have a watch of that.
But it's very good in that the psychology is fascinating, and the final scene is very haunting as well. But it really does show the politics of the French High Command. Which is, so that is a highly recommended one as well.
There is actually, bringing me on to a French one. I think it's more sort of based on a real story, but I'm not 100% on that. And I can't remember its name, but it's based around a father and his son from the French colonies of Africa. And I haven't seen it. I've only watched bits and bobs, sections, but it does seem quite interesting. And I've heard reviews, so it's not, it's not strictly true, but I think at the same time, if you're looking at it from just a story point of view, it should be at least interesting. But there was tales of men and fathers and sons sort of fighting alongside each other. There was one where a father was standing next to his son, and his son just was hit by a shell. So it's definitely happened.
It seems to happen more with the French, doesn't it? I don't seem to see so much of that with the British.
It was rarer with the British, but I think in the PALS battalions it was more common, but it was still pretty rare from what I've seen anyway.
Yeah, it's something again that might be a bit of an interesting thing to sort of dig into. But I would definitely recommend Paths of Glory. It's a very anti-war film, which is what you'd expect from the sort of the era, because that's another problem, isn't it? Films are very much of their era. I mean, the classic outside of this is MASH is not really about Korea; it's about Vietnam.
Yeah.
So you do get that, but I'd recommend that one. So we're getting towards the end of the list. So let's keep on the foreign theme then. Your thoughts on All Quiet on the Western Front? Now we should be able to get some agreement here because we've got 3 versions to play with.
So I personally love the 1970s one. I think it is.
It's about 78.
I really love that. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it was before I was born. Just to age everyone in the chat. But I personally really love that one. I think it's a wonderful. See, the thing is, All Quiet on the Western Front is a dramatization of one person's experience, and it's kind of made to sort of be quite anti-war. But the thing is also the Nazis hated it. So if anything, that's. Yeah, so if the Nazis hate it, the author had to run away. I think his sister got murdered as a result of that book. So and I the Netflix one, not so keen. I enjoyed it, don't get me wrong, but it's not as historically good as the 1978 one.
I think my rant on that was about 30 minutes for how bad it was. For those who want to see it, it is on the YouTube channel. But it had. I was gutted because I saw the trailer and I thought, oh, wow, this looks fantastic. Yes, it's the mud, but they had French tanks. I have never seen French tanks on TV. Although rather ironically, they converted from Russian BMP-1s. But yeah, if you actually watched the 78 version and the recent version, you would not even think they were the same film, would you?
I agree. Yeah, no, they're not the same film at all. There's nowhere near.
No.
I wouldn't even say they're from the same source material, to be honest.
No. Although interestingly, all the film versions miss out where he fights the British. They only ever have them fighting the French. Bit of an oddity.
It's amazing anyway. But then again, so Storm of Steel, which is actually more of a diary, sort of more realistic. But yeah, no, I love both of those books.
Yeah, but the 70s version is definitely a brilliant one. I mean, it's got Ian Holm in it, which is always a good start, playing Himmelschross. That was good. I'm going to hold out, though, for the 1930s version.
I haven't watched that one. It's a bit too old for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I wasn't around for that. Let me clarify that. I watched it first as a teenager, and there is a scene that's haunted me, I think, for want of a better word. It's a scene which summed up the First World War for me. The French are attacking, and they're firing away. He cuts to Paul, he's throwing a grenade, and then it cuts back after the grenade's gone off, and there are two hands just hanging on the barbed wire, amputated. And I'm sitting there going, you did this in 1930? It's
I think it's a lot of the veterans were around them, weren't they?
You know, because that would have been shocking in the 1970s.
Mm.
But to see it then, and that to me, that's the one image that massively sticks in my mind.
Yeah, no, that would stick in my mind as well.
Yeah.
Mind you, that I had, so I was listening to, what book is it? Let me just remind myself on what book it is I'm listening to currently on the Audibles, not a sponsor.
If they want to,
by they want to sponsor us, yeah. By Martin Gilbert, and he said that some legs were just hanging, German legs were just amputated, hanging over the British parapet. And the officer said, "You need to remove them." And Sergeant went, "Well, where am I going to hang my helmet?" Eventually, they did move them.
Where is it? I can't remember the reference. There's a bit where you've got an arm hanging out into the trench, because the French just buried the troops into the trench. And this is a former French trench, and the shells exposed this hand. And as they walk past it, they're all shaking hands with it. Someone would give it a cigarette and light it. Again, it's that very black humor, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, it's that. It's quite. I think that sort of should be what sums up the everyone really, the French, Germans, and the British. They were all sort of equally. Well, I think all of them were equally sort of dark humoured or black humoured.
And I think they had to be. You know, they went through his film, and they wouldn't talk about it afterwards. You know, and it's one of that's one of the big differences with today now is it is acceptable to talk about it. You know, and if anybody is having mental health problems, talk to somebody.
Definitely agree.
You know, man up is no longer the right way to do it. It never was.
It should never have been. Yeah. No, that's the thing, and you know, I think that should go for everything really. If you having a problem, talk about it.
Yeah. We're getting quite serious now, aren't we?
I know. It's unlike us. We're usually quite black humid.
Yeah. It is nice, at least with All Quiet on the Western Front, we've sort of gone, yeah, let's forget the modern version. At least we've agreed on that.
Yeah.
So there's another big budget film which is worth mentioning. I think we haven't really talked much about. Is War Horse.
See, I cried at that movie. You know, not afraid to admit that. I did have a bit of a tear. I loved that movie. That was great. I haven't been to see that play, but I assume it's very similar.
I do desperately want to see the play because of John Tam's music, who I absolutely loved when he did all the music in Sharp. So I do need to go and.
I haven't watched Sharp. Not a fan.
You obviously have a life, and I haven't. I think is the way this is coming across, isn't it?
Oh no, what is it? See, I watch a lot of. There's Redcoat History. I watch him quite a lot, and you know. But I'm to be honest, I just love the Brown Bess. He's just a beautiful weapon. So you know, it's hard to get behind old Sharp with his you know, with his rifle. You know.
Yeah, we'll have to have a chat next time I catch up with you on the first one. That's even more fascinating.
I do need to watch it. I love Sean Bean, so it's fine.
Yeah. I mean, in all fairness, when he plays Sharp, he's amazing. Sharp is so awesome, even Sean Bean playing him, and he survives.
I think he starts writing into his contract he's going to survive in everything since.
I think he has started saying stuff. But yeah, War Horse for me was spectacular. I do love the replica Mark IV tank that they built for it. which is down at the Tank Museum in Bovington, and they take it out and run it regularly. So yeah, I mean, from that perspective, it also shows a cavalry charge, which you don't usually see in World War I. And I like the fact that the cavalry charge succeeds initially.
Which is quite rare for World War One.
Was, but it was nice to see it. They on screen, because we're so used again to the image of them being mown down by the machine guns, which obviously does happen later on.
Probably comes from Crimea, doesn't it? Let's be honest.
Yeah, could well do. I mean, it's the myth of the Polish cavalry is a story for another day, isn't it? In World War II.
It is. Yeah.
But yeah, a bit melodramatic, I thought, for me.
It is, but that's why I love a good cry.
But then again, it's a children's novel originally. Although Michael Morpurgo does not do cosy children's novels. Let's be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
But I like it. I'm going to be honest. It's not top of my list, but it is.
It's not getting my top 10, but if I want to cry, I'll watch it.
Yeah. So
it's the same with 1917. If I want to go cry, because when that guy dies, I can't even remember his name. That's how bad it is. Sob.
Yeah.
And his brother comes along.
Yeah. Actually, a very well done death as well. In the sense that you can see the color drain away and everything.
It was impressive.
Yeah. And that was the thing. That had lots of good little detail, as we said earlier. Yeah. So, go on. Well, I've got one last film on my list, which I think is probably the best World War I film, which is Journey's End.
Wow, yes.
Don't tell me we're agreeing.
Yeah, no, we'll agree on that one.
We ought to stop at this point, didn't we?
Yeah.
So much nice detail in that film. And I think the fact for me, from a historical perspective, the fact it was written, the play originally by a World War I veteran on his own experiences, and also the fact it's the date it's set of the Kaiserschlacht, the end of the war. That is, you don't expect to see it. And it's a film that I think is phenomenally well done in that it doesn't actually portray much fighting. Which is, let's be honest, that is the experience of most World War I soldiers. Yeah,
a lot of them, they would see the enemy, but that would be about it. It would be, you'd hear the fire, but that's it.
Yeah.
It was a sit and wait game.
Yeah. And to me, it tackled so much of World War I. It tackled things like the psychological damage with Stanhope's drinking. The hero worship side of it, the public schoolboy coming in, the sheer range of backgrounds that people were from, having the schoolmaster, old uncle in there. The fact that the cook can't actually cook, but he's there to give him a break. Yeah, I can see the smile. It's all there.
No, I agree. It's a beautiful movie, and
Yeah. So that was an unusually sort of what's the word I want? Amicable bit for us. Oh, let's be honest. We don't get nasty with it. We just disagree sometimes. So
we're allowed to do that, right?
Yeah. Well, it makes a change. I'll tell you what. Go on then. Shall we go for our top 3 recommendations for somebody who wants to get into the history of World War I, or not to say the history, but wants to understand World War I? Your top 3 films.
And TV shows. Because I'm going to say my top 1 is Anzacs. I actually got invested in that. The characters invested me in that.
What we'll do when you finish watching it, I'll tell you who was my favourite character, because I can't tell you why without massive spoiler for later on. So that's your number 1. What about your other 2? A hideous feeling Paul has dropped out at this point. Give him a second, see if he comes back. still showing us frozen. So while we're waiting for him to come back, I'll just quickly give my 3 then.
There we go.
Oh, you're back. Okay, I've just managed to waffle for a few seconds to fill the.
I was trying to stop recording as well. I was like, oh.
Yeah. So you've got Anzacs as your number 1. Now, what else are you going to go for?
Probably. Let me just pull up the list. Just I would say, well, it's not technically a fictional. I would say the 19. Oh God, in the laptop. 1978, All Quiet on the Western Front. That would be my second one. It shows a really good German perspective of the war, if nothing else, and probably Tolkien, which is once again not technically World War One truly, but I think it does highlight a lot of the things.
I think what it, as we said earlier, what it does, it shows the impact on someone's life of the First World War. Yeah,
I agree.
I've realised I've now put myself on the spot because I've got to pick my 3 now, haven't I?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I deserve that for doing that. I'm gonna put Anzacs on the list as well. I'm gonna put it in 3rd place, because like I say, it was aimed at people who are new to it. It's the sheer length, but don't choose the short film version. You think, oh, I'll just get that. Watch the whole thing. So that's my 3rd place.
I agree with watching the whole thing.
Yeah, 2nd place, I think is going to be All Quiet on the Western Front, but I'm going for the 1930s version. Although, in all fairness, the 78 version is only just pipped by it. And then in 1st place, I'm going to have to go for Journey's End. I think those would be my 3.
Yeah, they're all good picks.
To be honest, I think all the ones we've picked there. Okay, we've got the one overlap. That's 5 films. If you've watched them, you have, I think, a decent understanding of the experiences of the First World War.
Yeah, I agree. I think that because that sort of would give you a really good base for sort of growing and sort of progressing your knowledge into the rabbit hole that is the trench network of
We've got one who does go down this route. There's a lot of rabbit holes to go into. Although, would it be foxholes or dugouts that you could go into? It's probably a better way to look at it.
Probably foxholes, wouldn't it? It's probably foxholes.
Yeah. Although
it's like, even if you look at the Pacific theatre and you look at the Japanese, and you look at the the sort of conflict over in German Ireland.
Yeah.
And then you look at sort of Russian front as well. Don't forget that it was a mental sort of place, and then it changed into if you even then look into the Russian Civil War, and then the Brits, the French, and the Japanese, everyone basically starting to attack everyone there as well. So with the whites, the blacks, the greens, the pinks, the reds, because they all just chose colours for some reason.
Yeah, who's the leader? I'm trying to think of the leader who's an absolute lunatic. Thinks he's the reincarnation of Genghis Khan.
I can't remember all of them.
Oh, he's fascinating.
There was anarchist factions. There were the green were my favourite, I think, and the blacks. They because the greens I think were peasants mostly. They were just like people that just wanted to go back to normality but didn't want to join the whites.
Yeah, I think if you wanted to game the Russian Civil War, that is a great place to go. I mean, I always have the urge to do a skirmish game with Trotsky's personal bodyguard from his train. I don't know if you've seen these. They wear
but I'm just starting to delve down that little rabbit hole of the Russian Civil War, and I love it so much.
They wear head to foot red leather. They look like the bodyguard of Ming the Merciless. There's very little you can say to that one.
Yeah. Mind you, the anarchists were blacks, I think, and they were.
Yeah. The nice thing from our perspective, though, is actually because to me, the Russian Civil War is still part of the First World War. We've got all these little bits.
It is, yeah.
In future,
yeah.
And it is.
No, it's
quite a lot of
part of the First World War.
Look at them. I've actually got 1914 to 1919.
Mm.
You know,
But,
because
even longer than that, didn't it?
Yeah, that really used to puzzle me as a child. It finished in 1918. Why? You know.
Also, what is it? There was some, as I said about that Belgium cemetery. There's Russian, I think 3 or 4 Russian dead who died in 1919, or at least were recorded as dying then. But they were
Yeah.
probably prisoners of war, either died before or around that time in prison camp, basically. They didn't know when, so they just buried them at that time.
Yeah.
So,
It's the thing is, official records can get very complex. I was digging up casualties on American casualties for D-Day, and all the missing are recorded as dead on the 6th of June 1945. Because if they're missing, they're left for a year before they're declared dead. So it's very hard to work out how many casualties there were on D-Day.
yeah, because if they went missing instead,
yeah,
they wouldn't have been recorded.
Yeah, so it took a year before
D-Day.
they were recorded as dead. Yeah, fascinating. But I'll tell you what, let's have a bit of fun to finish then. If there was any one film, if you were creating a film for World War One, what would you create it about? I'll give you a second to think. I'm going to give you what I would love to see. I would love to see a film about Adrian Carpenter-Waite. We've talked about him in the past. The unkillable soldier from the Sabaton song. He is so fascinating. And reading his autobiography, I mean, you would have to use other sources because he misses out one minor detail, like the fact he wins the Victoria Cross. He just forgets to mention it. So I'd love to see a biopic of him. So what would you like to see filmed about the First World War?
I would probably. So I've just been reading the official histories of the Cambridges, funny enough. And it's written very much like a novel, from two people's perspective. Brigadier General Riddle and Lieutenant Colonel Clayton. I'd love to see how the Cambridges from 1914 to 1919 sort of progress, because there's interesting characters. There's like I think he's Private Nightingale, who basically just follows. He's got like 20/20 vision. So Rindle, sorry, starts using him sort of like binoculars almost, and follows him around everywhere. And is a real lovable character. I think he dies actually in World War One, which is really sad, but you don't really mention it in the book. Claydon, there's Lieutenant Saint as well, Lieutenant Colonel Saint, who's then the sort of interim leader of the Cambridge. He dies as well. It's a very bad story. Dies of wounds, and then you've got the wonderful Clayton at the end, sort of, who then goes on to actually sort of look after the battalion. And the Cambridges are all sort of territorials, so it's quite a nice look at especially when you think that they start their sort of their sort of look from 1940. Actually, the summer camp, we're having the summer training camp. And then sort of how that mobilizes sort of basically right at the end of that camp sort of triggers everything for them.
Yeah,
and it's a really interesting read. I would love to see that as a movie. Sorry, as a TV show. You could do it as that.
That's a TV series. That's almost Anzacs for the British, isn't it?
Yeah, just following that one battalion, the first Cambridges, the territorials, as they go through.
Yeah.
So it's a really lovely story, and there's like fun moments. There's dark moments as well. There's one time while he's Colonel, Riddle goes, "Follow me," to this gingerhead soldier private, and as the private turns around to go, "Yeah, okay," he gets machine gunned through the head, and he explains all the sort of graphic detail. Like, oh wow, and he's like, "You come with me then," and they go off to sort of investigate this or whatever. So yeah, it's that interesting everything.
Yeah,
so that's I'd love to see that.
Yeah, that would definitely work. So if there's anybody out there who's a film producer and wants to speak to us,
yeah, I've got the book. It's great.
Well, I think that's been a really interesting first podcast.
No, definitely. Don't forget to like and subscribe to everyone who's watched this.
Yeah, and give us your thoughts. Let us know what films you'd recommend, and what future things you'd like to see us talk about. I mean, if it takes off, we'll do more of these.
Yeah. No, I'd love to do more of these. I love war.
Yeah. So, thank you very much for listening. And if you've made it to the end, I'm seriously impressed.
Yeah, me too. We should talk. You need to get help.
So, goodbye from us.
Yeah, fun.